Item 2, apologies and leave of absence. We have an apology from Councillor Baker and Councillor Treby. Moving on to item 3, deputations. Rules of the deputation are: deputations are to be presented during the briefing session at item 3 in the order of business, which is where we are now. Deputations must relate to a report on the current briefing session agenda. A deputation is not to exceed 3 speakers in number, and only those speakers may address the council members. Speakers of a deputation will collectively have a maximum of up to 10 minutes, dependent on the number of deputations received, to address the council members unless an extension of time is granted. A deputation is to be in the form of a statement, and no debate or discussion on the matter is to occur. Questions from council members related to the subject matter should be reserved until the administration has presented on the relevant report during the meeting. However, a point of clarification by a council member on a specific statement may be permitted. There is an opportunity for public question time for members of the public at item 7 in the order of business. So we have one deputation this evening. I'm going to ask Councillor Civic to take the chair, as I do have a proximity interest in relation to the item that is being discussed, which is consideration of amendment number 8 to the Mindari Keys Harbourside Village Structure Plan number 13. So Councillor Civic, if you could please take the chair, and when the deputation is finished, then I will return to the chair. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Roberts. Now, the speaker is Mr. James McCallum. Would you like to come forward, Mr. McCallum? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. My name is James McCallum, representing Taylor Burrell Barnett, and I represent our clients, Mr. and Mrs. Athens, who are proposing to amend the residential coding of Lot 40, Roselare Promenade, Mindari, from R20 to R40. I've read the officer's report, including the reasons for refusal, and respectfully disagree with the recommendation. I seek the council's support for an alternative home in a manner which provides greater housing choice in the area. Consistent controls which ensures that the future built form has the same bulk, scale. We do not consider that our proposal is a spot recoding, as the site is strategically located, which is sympathetic with its surrounds. The controls we have proposed to put in place, with regard to the city's reasons for refusal, these may be summarised into two key reasons, and I'll respond to both of these in turn. The non-compliance identifier is greater than 400 metres from the site. However, this is also true of the extensive, broadly consistent with the existing strategic planning framework, which allows R40 and R60 areas outside and the Northwestern Sub-Regional Planning Framework, as it facilitates the construction. With regard to the matter of precedent and the perceived ad hoc nature of the proposal form outcomes, this is not an ad hoc proposal. As identified in the officer report, built form design or the impact on surrounding residents is capable of being dealt with. We request that Council view the proposed rezoning on its individual merits, that it is consistent, supporting the proposed amendment and recommending its approval to the WAPC. Thank you for your time.
Madam, we'll go straight to the section on planning and system.
Chair and council members, there are 2 items from to answer questions in relation to item 4.2. Item 4, number 9, Roselare Promenade, from a density code of Marina R20 metres, which could typically achieve a 2-storey building and include an indicative approximate number of apartments that could be developed on site from 3 units to 12 and 6 objections. The amendment has been assessed against the city's local planning's 3 criteria. The first criteria is on the opposite side of Cirrus Court, but this side is located within the street block recoding proposal, which by its nature is ad hoc and not in keeping with the character of the existing to ensure good design outcomes and consistency in approach. Implies one or more of the criteria in Table 3 of the local planning. The amendment does not meet these criteria for the reasons outlined in the report. It does not meet Objective D and the recommendations of the local housing strategy, West Sub-Regional Planning Framework. In summary, these documents guide increased density. Site is not located close to any of these areas. Precedent that could result in a proliferation of other proposals that together should not be supported. I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Mr Dixon.
One of the issues that the deputation came forward, why would you consider one side of the road okay to this side of the road?
That's contained on page 8 of your report. It does indicate Cirrus, that Cirrus Road east of that road is characterised by larger lots, and it's in our view it relates more to the development to the east of the existing.
So working on the other parts of your map on page 8, you've got the R20 there in that little pocket. Owners, whether or not they want to demolish their homes and build other units within.
So yes, that is certainly something that could be proposed, but isn't currently being. It's not strategic in nature. I think the guidance from both your local for proposals for density codification, for increasing density, they need to be approved. That was a strategic approach where we identified criteria. We then applied those criteria, stations or transit corridors, and those types of located near to a high frequency public transit corridor. It's not appropriate to support this particular proposal to amend.
Your comments about it being ad hoc, are you then suggesting that off-lot amendments to do a coding upscale? Is that what you're...
If council were to support this and it was supported by the commission, then there's nothing to stop us. It would make it more challenging if council supports one of these types of proposals, submissions that have been made in objection to the proposal, that the nature of the character changes the, by the very nature changes the character of the surrounding area.
Opposite this particular house, they're dense just around there. So I'm not sure how going forward the WA Planning Commission could approve this.
Part of the adjoining lots are not part of this particular item. So if you could...
And townhouses. And that would be why we should be looking at it. Is not as amenable, yet right opposite there are...
I think administration's view is that this dwelling, this lot, the existing R40 development, which is on the western side, pages 8 and 9, I think that area has definitely got a distinct, that's the character of that area. The land on the western side of Cirrus Court, as you pointed out, we believe that on the basis of the reasons that's outlined in the report, which would, in our opinion, change the character of the area.
For Mr Dixon, in terms of the precedent for spot residential lot in recent times, say perhaps in the last 10 years or so?
Thank you. On page 8, just looking at the map, is actually different to what's northeast of it. You would think that that block of land in that one block in R20 is all around of the harbour itself. And they're requesting to R40 is more in sync with what is around the harbour.
Key structure plan does allow for a range of this area, and I think coming back to Councillor Miles's point, a more strategic, holistic way, rather than being for one individual pocket of land for which is surrounding this lot to the east and to the south, changing one lot which is on the opposite side of an existing area of R40. And R relates more to the character of the areas to the east of that lot. The basis of, if you like, the approach to planning is to do these sorts of initiatives in a more, it's certainly the approach that the state government expects to provide areas that people can access and around train stations. So this doesn't meet any of its nature for spot recoding.
Thank you, Mr Dixon. Councillor Aitken.
or suburb within the city of Wanneroo. But you said that the structure allows for a range of density. Why then is there a problem?
Seen in the context of the surrounding area, we consider the Suez Court than it does on the western side, which has obviously already been developed dwelling. By having a change of this nature, it potentially other proposals in there, not necessarily adjacent, came forward, say the precedent may have been set. So for the reasons clearly articulated state planning policy, these sorts of proposals are definitely discouraged.
Oh, sorry, I thought you had another question. Okay, I'll call the Mayor back. Thank you.
I know the next item is 4.2, but I intend to bring, so could I ask Mr. Steve Marmion to please take the welcome, and also members of the Trandos family and members of the local community.
All members are quite familiar with the draft Nangara groundwater allocation plan, so I'm happy to go straight.
Occurred with the community. But Mr. Marmion, could you please advise you have been working closely with our growers?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. That's natural users should be exempt from any groundwater abstraction reductions. Recreational green spaces with the schools and hospitals to also be exempt from a proposed 3 to be brought forward and completed by 2028. Construction of a recycled wastewater plant for the stabilisation of the groundwater levels in North Wanneroo, and to deliver those initiatives.
Thank you, Mr. Marmion. And just to clarify,
Shared this content with our growers last Friday, and you can see we have a number of
questions on 419. Thank you. So we will go back.
Are the growers getting any compensation for that?
for any of the reduction for any of the growers or any of the users otherwise.
Because they've had their water licences repeatedly cut, is there possible to actually the land remains usable, whereas at the moment it's not because they don't have enough water?
Proposing cuts to the agriculture area, it is almost impossible for growers to said that they want to expand their operations to increase the economic output of their.
Councillor Nguyen.
Do we know whether there are any further cuts?
In one little area of the plan, there is some wording. We're not very comfortable with that either.
Yeah, that's a real concern, especially stale and you can't live loss in the future.
Mr. Marmion.
Through you, Madam Mayor, thank you for the question. And to reduce more dramatically their abstraction of including construction of desalination plants, whereas our growers and our agricultural...
It just seems unfair that there's been nothing left for our growers either to try scarcity in the water supply as well. So is there something that you, I guess, lose that 10%? Can we, I don't know if there's anything that sensation.
Thank you. Mr. Marmion.
Through you, Madam, is actually signed up to, but legislation hasn't been, government is buying back water licences from growers. So,
thank you. Councillor Civic.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. In relation to water trade, most of them are being so tightly held, and where licences are not being used, they're being absorbed.
I have heard of some growers buying water. Been a bit of that, but a lot of that land that now doesn't have a water licence.
Thank you, Councillor Miles. Yeah, thank you, Mayor. A couple of the points that I pick up on page 446, Moss or Yanchip desalination project. To 110 gigalitres of water. So a desalinator to retain its water sources for our parks and gardens and not have...
I've had a look at the southern desal plant and its capacity. We've cross-referenced I think they build desal plants in sort of 50 gigalitre modules, if you like. So within 2 modules currently being abstracted from the Nangara Mound.
And just further to that, it actually has made provision for having a desalination plant within...
large buffer area around the Alkimos wastewater treatment plant, as there is in any wastewater treatment plant. There's enough space there for a wastewater treatment plant as well as a...
So just to find out, and this is something that I don't know whether or not cheapest source of water, which you've highlighted in this report. My concern is new forms of play areas, vast areas for soccer fields and the like, and we may have to then go AstroTurf.
That bad. I mean, we've certainly engaged with the Department of Water. Council did work very closely with the Department of Water and Environmental, or was the Department of Water at the time necessarily for the development, but the abstraction of the water from the so it's not quite that bad, but it is not great.
Thank you, Mr Marmion. And Mr Bowring. So for Councillor Nguyen.
I'll take you to page 26. Fence, and I note your comments in responding to that. An adjoining owner is not permitted to paint, render or attach anything. The Building Commission's dividing fence guide wall, whereas in our particular, even with the consent of the neighbouring.
Thank you, Mr Bowring.
Thank you to you, Madam Mayor. Let's clarify what is a sufficient fence where there's disagreement, so that can be dealt with. Adjoining landowner, then the definition of dividing fence is the...
Sorry, I've got a few further questions. Just in relation to the penalty, $5,000, and actually getting them to pay for that penalty, quite a high amount to no one wants to do anything to erect a fence, and that could be, is it on both owners?
Mr Bowring.
First presented prior to initiating advertising. The provision is the same, which is, I believe, the question. It's only be through the court.
Yes, sorry. The question is, would you enforce
on whoever's been convicted of an offence? So it could be one or...
don't normally deal with disputes between neighbours. Other council do you know?
Mr Bowring.
And I'm not aware that other local authorities have anything, basically rely on the Dividing Fences Act to resolve these matters. So that's...
Or a simple dividing fence dispute. Someone from council could give an opinion on whether the fence is on the boundary lines all the time, and it can be quite costly for a fence that could help to send someone from our team to confirm.
This is a property matter between the individual party to any such issues, and they're proffering, we don't, and would need specific resourcing to do that. But again, it's...
Yeah, thank you, Amir. And I do understand administration, you know, old Super 6 style fencing which blows over. But my question today, I just would like to get a bit more clarification. And it says here, requires a greater definition or attach anything to the fence, trellis or... I think.
So that's in response to the submission from the community member who raised the dividing fence. So it's not about if there has been a verbal agreement in writing amongst each other and operate in that respect. And again, that there is a specific sorts of disputes about whether issues were agreed or not.
Law, amend the local law, but you've got an adjoining permission of the other owner. So is it, are we...
It's, yeah, essentially it's saying that, yeah, if you're going to modify the fence, then you should talk to them.
Okay, and then further down, that does confuse me because I'll do that. Now, underneath that one, it had to be 1.8 metres high, and it could be made out of colour bond or wood or a pole and wire style of fencing.
Thank you, Mr Bean.
Yeah.
I guess it's number 2, maybe more reflective of what people are going to build at the front of.
The front fence, that comment doesn't relate to, is actually outside of the local law. So that's why that comment says that essentially.
On that note, so if somebody's on a corner lot, near across the front portion,
I'll take that on notice. I can clarify that in writing.
because effectively,
Thank you, Mr Bowring. Further questions, councillors? Councillor
Sufficient fence. Where does it say front fence?
Are you referring to the submission table on page 9? The comment from the submitter, which is excluded from the definition of a sufficient fence. The sufficient fence is only the dividing fence
Okay.
to the sides and rear.
questions on 4.2. That concludes planning and sustainability. Thank you, Mr Dick. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There are 3 items this evening from
Top. Any questions on 4.3?
Page 82, the second image there. I know judging from that picture, it does look very tight, and I understand that obviously in terms of meeting the petitioners halfway on that.
Thank
you, Madam Mayor. We can certainly have another look on site and see if there is anything else that can be done to designed. Obviously, this was through the developer, but it has been built and designed. If there are any other options in terms of
Thanks, Mayor. At the top of page 78, it refers includes and measures.
Thank you. Mrs Terrelling.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. So identify the types of vegetation at the site and provide a pathway for the city. Vegetation is not negatively impacted by the works. And so basically...
Councillor Aitken.
I note in with this is that just because it's a petition, it's not included, or what?
Mrs
If any are going to be taken, and that will then determine what community consultation.
The recommendation here is not to support the request.
Yeah, certainly in regards to additional seating, I think that's not supported under these will now be undertaken or monitored and undertaken by the city because we actually undertake community engagement to assess the level of community support, and that we will monitor any issues with the buffer zone.
Questions, councillors? Councillor Miles.
yeah, thanks, Mayor. Just you want to monitor any reports and issues with the buffer zone. I know that's something that...
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We can include that in the item.
Councillor Herring.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Just out of curiosity, how long is the...
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We'll take that question on notice.
Over to the city from the 17th of December 2021. Did the city go improved or fixed?
Thank you, Mrs
Through you,
Terrelling.
Madam Mayor, yes, prior.
So the problem started then over December and January?
I guess what administration is saying is that the inspection didn't reveal any...
Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Mayor. When conducting that skateboard field, I guess, that could undertake that assessment.
Director of Assets to respond to that, because I believe it would be his team that does the inspection.
Thank you.
Which are of concern at this point in time. Just looking at the pictures, it appears that...
Further questions? Councillor Huntley.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a quick writing. I'm just wondering when that would occur.
Council has considered the report and the recommendations supporting floodlighting at the skate park. Normally the community consultation would
fall. There are none. Moving through to 4.5. And thank you, Mr Clem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We did want to just give a general...
Okay, so if you'd like to go to the particular item in the property section.
Give an overview of the group of items, please.
Thank you. Councillor on 4.7, 4.9. Councillor Rowe.
Of assets are reclassified or escalated to level 8 or above is escalated to 8 or above.
Thank you, Ms.
All of the ones that are are listed first in our long-term financial plan. So it's actually, and the on page 300, because as it says here, our overall asset stock is relatively new. Actually, then renewing is less than that amount, so that's why we get through. But perhaps the Director of Assets can talk a bit more about.
Assets which are rated 8, 9 or 10 generally can be classed as poor condition, but they are still safe of subject to further development. Some of the old roads or transport assets. Overall, looking at the portfolio, we have about $25 million worth of assets throughout the whole city, different classes. Make allowances in the long-term financial plan for asset renewals, but at the same time, we do make sure.
None. Moving on to strategic and business planning. Any speak to property services or Mr. Greer?
A general observation on the 5 reports that are presented in the briefing involve ground leases where community groups are developing facilities for themselves, positive community outcomes from those. Obviously, because has had to work to the current point with the groups and also in terms of the information that's leaves those new leased facilities that the clubs will operate. The Orion Cafe reports involve longer standing city leases, the communities that use them, and hopefully again we'll secure some really positive outcomes.
No.
In partiality interest on relation to this item at next week's council meeting.
Councillor Harridge?
Thanks, Madam Mayor.
Councillor Miles?
Thank you, Mayor. No interest. 392, that you talk about the premises. The centre would therefore have to, I guess, demolish the building. If it's in here that you've made comments about the roof is lifted.
Thank you. Mr. Greer?
Through you, Madam Mayor, maintained in the period that the department has leased it and made it available, and the Hepburn Centre operates under the state department, and they are supportive of attending to the repairs. So the lease.
The list is quite extensive, whilst not overly car park out of the lease. Is that because you want to use it more?
Necessarily. We looked at how the site is currently being operated, and doing is we're redrawing the leased area to reflect which party is actually.
So the car park being mainly, I'm not sure on this map, and the Hepburn Centre.
Mr. Greer?
Level change. So it would be, you'd be climbing a little bit to, but I guess in answer to the question, the car, but in practice, I suppose the use would be very similar to the parking adjacent Maloney car park, and equally there's probably times where clubs are using John Maloney and parking the Hepburns.
What the department originally was going to do with these particular sites around them. As the city asked them if they would like to purchase the land.
But equally they haven't raised it. I think the priority has been seen as the priority and a positive outcome.
And I'll just finalise it. Within the new lease, which you want to do 21 years, I think it is, are you going to be able to do that to make sure that this building is brought up to...
period of lease. So the lease will commence on execution and will run. And part of the second reason why we obtain those have occurred, and then we have that starting point then for reviewing the performance.
So Nguyen?
Just going back to the car park accident that occurs within that car park area, then the city is exposed to...
He has been maintaining the car park up until now, and he is. That land has been city land for a very long time.
Through the Mayor, our insurance covers all our owned areas.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Can I just refer you to page 3, category 1. Under the city's leasing policy, the rent has been discounted by communities, which is state government. Can I ask what a category 1?
You, Madam Mayor, there is currently a category in the city's leasing policy that provides for that discounted rent. It's in accordance with that.
It might be timely to just have a look at that policy before we approve this. Thank you.
Dean? Councillor Rowe? You have a declaration?
Who was involved in securing election commitment for the Northern Suburbs Menshed?
This connection costs. I understand that these guys are a not-for-profit organisation. Thought of any alternative locations for the group if they're a not-for-profit group to be able to take that on?
Developed by the group, so it's different from a situation where the city is building a facility. It's the group that has actually secured funding and is seeking further funding for its development. In that context, because the site is not currently potentially also from the other parties that are likely to develop the adjacent land, would the agenda report regarding other sites that had been looked at, there had actually been quite those were not suitable for various reasons, such as where the group's catchment is, and of city land available, particularly large greenfield vacant portion. Frankly, not really in the northern corridor either. Any with great purposes and great objectives, and it is frankly challenging. Some great progress on. We're trying to work with the state to minimise the outcome that keeps that servicing cost as low as possible. And then through the ground lease. So the position is already quite positive. It may get more positive with time.
Still problems with funding for the group. Have we found any alternative locations within Wangara, how developed Wangara is? Is there anything that the city can assist with, be supported, in terms of funding as well for the group? Because I'm just...
Greer.
Through you, Madam Mayor. Reviewing again whether there's any city land. Potentially there wouldn't be. If there was supports the city has already provided quite extensively to the group as part of buying a site for a group, so it's more likely advice and assistance, and that sort of soft support, I suppose, might be even in the vicinity of the showgrounds, such as the poultry shed.
Thank you. Councillors, further questions on 415? Councillor Miles.
On from Councillor Wrights. I have to say that administration spent a lot when it bought an existing factory unit in Wangara from the member for Lansdale, Margaret Quirk, which is great. I don't think we're doing that very much justice. So which would be a lot cheaper than them actually establishing the new site.
Need to just take that question on notice and clarify in the and the suitability for a men's shed, but we'll address that in the final report.
A cabinet-making men's shed on a park and garden who manufacture wood turnings, woodwork and metalwork as well.
That has had input from the city's planners in terms of the soonest they're not operating in that way. It's a recreation. It's not a sporting sites for the men's shed, and also looking at the sort of footprint they needed. 5 sites do they typically have? It's noted in the administration report that 3 of them, where they're leased by councils, they're actually often on there's a playground, large facility, and there's a men's shed on the side.
It still comes back to the fact that the northern and serviced, if the car park and the like. So if we're going to lease this land to that lot, that's what we should be doing. If we can't just, then it has to provide a lease of a service lot.
It's a matter of finding a balance in terms of the contributions. So it'd be unlikely to find buying a freehold portion in an industrial area. I suppose it is worth also noting, though, the city is providing a further contribution. It's something the city has previously budgeted and has been progressing in parallel to the negotiation.
Hi, I was just thinking, because they're going to be using they're using on that site, because obviously that area is on that site. So I just want to clarify if the structure plan allows for this change.
Mr Dixon.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the use is appropriate, as Mr Greer previously articulated. Land, given the nature, they're not commercial they're not a commercial entity. Additional information on this issue in the report for the council meeting, just to provide certainty and clarity for council.
Moving on to 416. Questions on 416, questions on 417 and 418. Comments. Thank you, Mrs Jennings, and thank you, Mr Greer. Governance and legal. Do you wish to speak to any item, Kate? Mr CEO.
Thank you. 420 have been subject to discussion previously with council. Well, that requires those authorisations. Madam Mayor, would welcome questions before doing the Chief Executive Officer Thank you, Madam Mayor. Happy
Okay.
to take questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Sims.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. I just wanted to ask administration in terms of the potential challenges arising from that method of voting, particularly in regards to the complexity.
I thought it might be useful if I refer to some comments provided by the local government. Provided the following comments in support of both first past the post and preference. Easily understood, removes politics out of campaigning or phantom candidates. In a preferential system, the person that receives the highest number include preferential voting is more democratic and removes an area of confusion. First past the post elections, candidates work together to get votes for each other. Preferential would make it past the post is unsuitable when there is more than one vacancy and allows for a greater representation. It is quite a subjective comments, but I thought I would refer to the
Mayor, that sort of has two subparts to the question. It's regarding the amount for the tender itself.
Mr Sims.
Common contracts, as well as making our own tender decisions, procurement decisions, and we balance that.
Thank you. Mrs Jennings.
I think it's something that a lot of local governments are interested in. So sometimes there may be a panel, use a panel and not go to tender because they're pre-qualified, and smaller local governments that may not have enough resource to actually go out to us. So there's definitely benefits to be had, and it's part of our...
And just the second part of that question, Madam Mayor, the criterion particular or more weighting than perhaps another criteria such as...
Criteria is a choice in how we might go about the purchase. So, and also we'll just go to the panel, or we might have a look at a panel and think, panel then. So it's really more a choice before you get to that stage.
Just in regards to...
Sorry, Councillor Wright.
Just in terms of Anna, is note that more transparency is required in respect of the preferred as much as we do. And part two to that question is in terms of what savings we're getting, what are the benefits we're getting. So I just want to know a bit more information in terms of that, in terms of supporting
corporate strategy to answer the first. So yes, we can, and we can also ask WALGA for council at a forum about how their service works. I might ask Mrs Jennings to answer question one.
More that we wanted to understand how the department thinks the panel will work. Clear to us what might happen to the panel if WALGA was removed.
I just wanted to ask a question in relation to the panel. Is the intention of the change now having, in particular, Schedule 3 complaints to be to deal with that particular complaint?
Consistently noted in our submissions, that's not properly articulated in the proposed reforms, having that in an internal level, and it's something that we make a strong comment on.
For all local governments, can you provide us with some further details on what that would look like? That's paragraph 11, the introduction of mandatory statewide.
I think partly we'd like more clarification as to what that means.
And just the paragraph 10 before that.
The Director of Corporate Strategy and Performance to just explain that. I think it relates more
Through the Chair, I think that came from the City of Perth inquiry, where there was really what is that, and perhaps we've made a suggestion. Space that is leased is an important aspect, but
Further questions, councillors? Councillor Miles.
Thank you. The preferential voting. There was an article in the Freeman corrupt, because people go around collecting mail and the people coming into community centres and voting in person. However, there can, or within the local government managers association, whether or not...
Mr Sims.
I think perhaps council postal voting, and the other is first past the post or preferential. So the postal voting system as opposed to the in-person, but I'm not familiar with...
I think the context behind it is that and gone to jail and done all that sort of stuff for that. And it was even in the way to go. There's no checks and balances currently in place. When I asked the returning officers last year, for instance, they said that put it in the ballot and just tick off that that person has voted. But nobody's doing it at that level. But I'm just wondering whether or not we should be maybe tough, being filled out by the correct person that it's mailed to.
Opportunity to make a suggestion about what is the Electoral Commission. About 3 or 4 months ago, ran a sort of stakeholder forum with some key. It's appropriate that we add something to our submission about that sort of its conduct, and the other is the performance of the system itself. So,
moving on to 421. Questions on 4 to discuss next week. Item 6, late reports, we have none. Item 7, public question time.
5.1, can I ask a couple of questions be included for next week's discussion? Can we be advised how many cats are actually registered currently within the city? Stations have been microchipped or desexed. How many end up at council area cats are going to be prohibited from if we go that way, please? Thank you.
Item 7, public question time. There is no questions, Mrs. Smart? No. It's Mr. Ty Matson's final meeting. And I would just like to every success for where you're going. I know the Shire President, where you're moving to, is absolutely best. Thank you. Big round of applause. Closed doors. Thank you.